Welcome once again to basically part two of this Suidlanders chat between me, Marius Greyling, and Simon Roche. On the part one, we discussed the USA bombing of Iran, what they classified as a huge success, what the rest of the world say wasn't a success, and so forth. And then now in part two, Simon, are we going to talk a bit about what is the feeling of the other countries towards what has happened over the weekend?
Yes, Marius, I heard your question. Marius, I've prepared something, pre-prepared some writing here that's a little bit different to that, but we
Okay,
can certainly get onto it. So don't forget about it.
no problem.
Can I open with something else though? I'd like to dedicate this video to Peter Burchik, who passed away in 2021, I believe. He was from Vereniging. He and his twin brother were businessmen. He was the son of a Croatian immigrant to South Africa during the communist period. He escaped Yugoslavia, excuse me, came to South Africa and married an Afrikaner woman. And they had the two sons. I don't know if they were sisters. And Peter went back to Croatia and made business there, but he was very much a South African. He was based in South Africa, but he had property developments in Croatia. And Peter Burchik was the guy who arranged for us to go to the European Union in 2019. And he sadly, during COVID, went to Croatia and passed away there. He and I had a very minor difference of opinion sometime previous. He was trying to convince me of his point of view, and we got into a debate, and it was very amicable, the conversation. But a few months later, I posted something on one of my groups on this subject that he wasn't entirely happy with, namely the COVID. And then he disappeared from the group. And I thought that we'd had a falling out. And I fell ill sometime after that. And it was just one of those things where I never followed up, and I should have. And it turned out that he passed away. I only discovered a few months ago, and I've been meaning to mention it in my videos for, as I say, about 4 or 5 months. Peter Burchik, one of the nicest, most pleasant human beings I've ever met in my life, a very successful businessman and a true patriot of the Boervolk, somebody who was willing to go to a great deal of cost to give Suidlanders the exposure that we got at the European Parliament a few years ago. So rest in peace, Peter Burchik.
Okay.
And without further ado, I'll get on with a few comments. I'm going to throw some comments at you, Marius, or some observations, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
I remind the audience, if they've watched video number one, and it's pointless watching this video before video number one because we sketched a lot of background information there for people to understand context better. On that note, almost as a continuation of that background, I remind people that 2 days into the Israeli attacks on Iran and the Iranian retaliation, whoever's side you may be on, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of fact that Israel did launch the first strike on Iran, or the first strike in this ongoing conflict 2 Fridays ago. 48 hours later, on the Sunday, American politicians were using the phrase regime change. So they went very quickly from saying that this is all about Iran's nuclear program, especially with all of the pushback from people like Colonel Douglas Macgregor and countless others of his ilk. They made it about something else altogether. Regime change. Now all of a sudden it's about regime change. And I urge people to bear that in mind when they weigh up this matter. I'm not endeavoring to persuade anybody to see things as I do. But I do say that even if you have the strongest objections, excuse me again, to our views, what we're seeing occur before our very eyes in this Israel-Iran conflict, just remember that by its own standards, the USA has changed its tune on what this is actually all about. Another comment that I'd like to throw at you, Marius, and this might seem somewhat arbitrary. As I say, I'm just throwing out a few things here to prick people's imaginations before we go on in a straight line. If it was ever about Iran's nuclear weapons program, the nuclear weapons program that the IAEA has definitively demonstrated not to exist, scientifically demonstrated not to exist, and which Tulsi Gabbard and the 16 various United States intelligence agencies have all sworn not to exist, then why is it that the USA is not acting equally vigorously against North Korea? For those who are unsure, please open the Google Earth on your phones and have a look for yourselves at North Korea's proximity to the USA. Do a little bit of scratching about the distances that North Korea's domestic missiles can travel and the payloads that they can carry, and watch one of the videos that either I've made or Judge Andrew Napolitano on Russia's gifting of Topol M intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles to North Korea. Clearly, North Korea poses 1,000 times, 1,000 times 1,000 greater threat to U.S. national interests, as the USA keeps on saying with regard to why the USA is acting against Iran. It's all about U.S. national interests. Clearly, even 1,000 times 1,000 is an understatement of the degree and the extent to which the North Koreans pose a greater threat than the Iranis do to U.S. national interests. Another comment that I'd like to throw at you, Marius, or throw at the audience is, if nuclear non-proliferation is so important, then why does Israel not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and not permit International Atomic Energy Agency inspections as every country in the world permits? You may say Israel is the chosen people of God. Therefore, they can do what they like, when they like, how they like. They're perfectly entitled to nuclear weapons. It's only the Iranis and the North Koreans who are naughty if they have nuclear weapons. Yes, fine. But why should they not be subject to the same international scrutiny, observation, not control, observation, as all of the other countries of the world that have nuclear weapons are subject to scrutiny and observation? Another, now the comments are perhaps becoming slightly more connected to one another. I'll throw in that Dmitry Medvedev former president and prime minister of Russia, now the deputy head of the State Security Council, which is headed by Uncle Vladimir, says in a social media post, I believe Twitter and Telegram, says that there are countries willing to provide Iran with nuclear weapons. This is a tremendously, I don't know if the right word is provocative, but taking it up a level, upping the ante type of a statement. Very, very, very big. That is such a central mouthpiece of the state of Russia, of the Russian Federation, not some peripheral character, not some scarcely known junior member of the cabinet, not a ferocious member of the parliament of the Russian Duma, but Dmitry Medvedev himself saying there are countries, presumably referring to Russia, willing to provide Iran with nuclear weapons. It's a very, very, very big thing indeed. And I think that we should, as you began the show, Marius, asking about what people, what other countries feel about this. The topic is edging in that direction.
Yeah.
But before we get there, this is perhaps something I should have mentioned earlier. The IAEA has said that there are no signs of radiological emissions from the 3 sites that were struck. Isfahan, that Donald Trump insists on calling Isfahan. In fact, in his official statement after the strikes, immediately after the strikes, shortly after midnight on Sunday, the 22nd of June, that is to say yesterday, in the wee hours, you can go and listen to it, he pointedly says, blah, 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 Isfahan. So I don't know what is the point that he's trying to make there by mispronouncing the name. Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz. Those are the 3 sites that were struck of Iran's 33 core nuclear installations, and there are no radiological emissions from any of those attacked sites. Another somewhat arbitrary comment, which you or others may find interesting. Some people are saying that Iran's air defense is poor because they could not shoot down the B-2 bombers or intercept the Tomahawk missiles that were used in the strikes, which may be true, but it is noteworthy that as early as 1960, Soviet air defenses were capable of shooting down Gary Francis Powers' U-2 CIA reconnaissance jet flying at 767 kilometers an hour at 21 kilometers high, 70,000 odd feet above the ground. Now, of course, Tomahawk missiles fly very much quicker than that, and the B-2 Spirits are 50 years further on from, or 60 years further on from the date of the design and building of the U-2 spy planes. They were designed and built in the 1950s. No 2 ways about it. However, it is noteworthy to me that with all of the incredible developments in air defense in recent years, that we didn't see even any attempts, I haven't seen, to strike those incoming Tomahawk missiles or those B-2 Spirit bombers. So I put it to you that, and this is just a comment, an observation, I don't know for sure, that maybe, just maybe, the Iranis chose not to harm the Americans' material of war. In other words, that they said, we're going to fight this thing to the end, as we've told the world 1,000 times. We're going to continue to batter Israel. We're going to do whatever we're going to do, but let's not risk making this phase of events 10 times worse by blowing 7 stealth bombers and their escort fighters out of the air. I don't know that for sure. It may be that the stealth bombers were perfectly stealthy and their armed escorts were perfectly stealthy, and that the Tomahawk missiles were just too quick. It may be, but I think it's worth mentioning that it seems somehow improbable that we just aren't seeing any evidence of any attempts, failed or otherwise, and we're not getting any leaks from the Pentagon telling us that, oh, the Iranis fired 163 air defense missiles, but they all missed because we're wonderful. In fact, we're especially wonderful. We might be the most especially wonderful in history. I think we are the most especially wonderful in history, as they've been saying over and over and over again during the past 36 hours, as you know, Marius.
Yeah.
The last of my comments, then we can change gears. I think it's worth mentioning that yesterday the Irani parliament voted to shut the Strait of Hormuz, or the Straits of Hormuz. And we've discussed what that means before. We don't have to go into it all over again. But for those people who are unaware, it's purely symbolic. The parliament doesn't have the right to instigate such action. Neither does even the president of Iran. Only the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has the right to ordain or to instigate such an action. So there's a whole bunch of somewhat arbitrary or at least disconnected or random remarks that I thought I would throw into this conversation before we go further, because I think that many of the points that we've just made may be not have been made before. For our viewers' benefits. Marius, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, Simon, I agree with you with the air defense thing that you said about Iran, and they didn't even attempt to shoot anything down. What immediately came up with me is when I listened to Judge Napolitano, is that he said the unlawfulness of what Israel and the USA did, and the lawfulness of what Iran is doing with their strikes, with their defense of the territory now, that they are allowed to attack Israel now because of the laws that has been broken and they've been attacked. Now, I almost think that they almost let it happen, Iran, with the USA bombing strikes, knowing that they wouldn't lose too much out of it. But now they've got that card up their sleeve, that ace in their back pocket to say, well, we are justified now to attack you as a retaliation of the unlawfulness of how you helped Israel or attacked us or whatever. So it also lets me think of Russia, that has warned for years and years and years and years about what NATO was doing, and warned them, and now that they've proclaimed war against Ukraine, well, 2 years ago, everybody's up in arms, but they have done the lawful thing to warn and warn and warn, and then only acted on it. So maybe that was Iran's plan all along, to let the USA bomb them.
Yeah, I think it may have been. I think that Iran might be playing this more cunningly than people suspect. You know, I think, Marius, that maybe in spite of my ongoing frustration and even fury at the unwillingness of people in the world to recognize what's going on, you know, you've heard me rant and rave and get all hot under the collar over people's simple failure to see with their own eyes what's cooking. It may be that in the corridors of power in places like Moscow and Tehran, that these guys are aware of an enormous plot to bring about a third world war in the year 2025, very, very specifically the year 2025, to herald or to bring in, to to call or to cause the coming of, depending upon your opinion, the Antichrist or the second coming or the first coming, for that matter. Again, depending upon who you are, of the Messiah.
Mm.
I think that it may be that these Iranis and the Russians, for that matter, know what these dark and mysterious powers are up to. And they're playing the game a little bit more cunningly and a little less simply than I give them credit for. I'm forever enraged by how dumb they seem to be, because when Vladimir Putin and the Ayatollah and the president of Iran speak, even if you're not on their side, and I'm not on the side of Shia Islam, I promise you, sometimes you think, heavens above, can you fools not see what's going on? Why do you always respond in such childlike terms to events in Ukraine perpetrated by NATO and events in Iran now? Why don't you advertise the real truth?
Yeah.
Maybe they do know the real truth more than that I give them credit for, and they're just playing a little bit dumb in the spirit of incredible shrewdness and patience. Marius, maybe that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to think that is the thing that that we're missing almost when it comes to Iran and Ukraine and Russia now, is that they are playing it very smart, like you just said, because they've been always painted through the movies, through the media, through everything as the bad guys. So any person that doesn't follow news regularly or that follows the mainstream media for that fact will always see them as the bad guys. And I'm not saying that they're not bad guys or they're good guys or whatever, but they have to play much smarter. Because the good guys, the first world countries, America and Israel, they can basically get away with murder, whereas they have to be very smart in how they do things so that the whole world doesn't turn against them because they have always been painted as the black sheeps.
Yeah, that is what I think is the motive too. I've agonized over this subject, and it's the only reason that I can come up with. Namely, as you say, that they learned a long time ago that it didn't matter what they said, they would lose the information war hands down. Therefore, it was pointless getting into a ferocious argument about the facts and the truth. Anybody who's had a bad, dirty, messy, ugly, nasty divorce or relationship breakup may know that. Sometimes it's just better not to even engage in logic and reason and rationale and facts and statistics and truths, because you're just going to get screamed down and you're never going to get anywhere. And there's no judge in the room to say, well, she wins the argument or he wins the argument. It's just the one who has the greater ferocity that kind of comes out on top in the face of the truth. And I think that you're dead right, Marius. That's the only reason that I can come up with for why these guys simply don't engage on that level of truth. They pretend that everything is as it's presented, you know. They vaguely hint at the possibility of NATO soldiers in Ukraine for 18 months, 2 years. turning a complete blind eye, apparently turning a complete blind eye to the fact that NATO had advisors and specialists and soldiers in Ukraine since long prior to the beginning of the invasion on Thursday, the 24th of February, 2022. Yeah, I don't think there's maybe another reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to mention is that there are, as people are aware, a number of what are known as oligarchs in Russia. Now, an oligarch is somebody who rules by wealth. In South Africa, you might say that we are ruled by plutocrats, thieves. So the greatest opportunity for theft is always what takes precedence. The guy who is stealing the most does so because he's in a position to steal the most, and he uses the fact that he steals the most to consolidate his position best. So that's a plutocracy, when theft and crime are effectively substitutes for democracy. An oligarchy is when a country is ruled by wealth, when, let's say, 10 barons control a king. They say to the king, we'll give you 100,000 silver coins a year, and you'll do our bidding. You'll be the figurehead. You will be the nominal or the titular head of state, the sovereign. But the moment that you don't do things in a way that suits us, we're going to withdraw our support from you, and we're going to put somebody else there in your stead. So that name, oligarchs, is quite a nasty name that was devised in the West to disparage the Russian state during the very late 90s and the early 2000s, or the 2000s, right up to now. Anyway, many of those oligarchs were kicked out by Putin, and their assets were rightly taken away from them because they were, in the first place, gained very, very dishonestly. There's a lot of good material on that. It was basically theft in the first place. So at some point, Vladimir Putin said to them, enough is enough. You've stolen enough from this country. Give it back. You can keep whatever you've got in foreign bank accounts, but bugger off. One of those supposed oligarchs, as I say, it's a disparaging name, is a guy, a very pious man, that is to say, a very religious and humble man, called Konstantin Malofeev. His claim to fame is that he owns a media empire. He's very pro the Russian state, pro Christianity. He invests huge amounts of money in programs that support the family, that support children, that support traditional Russian values, and so on and so forth. He has, in recent days, said, I beg your pardon, not recent days, in the past 36 hours, said that it's high time that Russia give Tehran support in the form of air defenses, missiles, and other technology. He is not some yokel with an opinion. He's an immensely powerful, very highly regarded, and deeply admired, as I say, pious man. He's very renowned for his devotion to our Lord and Savior, the Lamb of God. And as I say, by no means a lightweight character. And I thought that it would be interesting for our listeners or viewers to hear that, because it may be that is symptomatic of the mood at the highest levels of power in Russia. I don't know for sure. It may be that others disagree with him. But when you consider what Dmitry Medvedev has said over the past 36 hours, and when you consider the level of absolute provocation that was the events of yesterday in the wee hours of Sunday morning, just after 12 o'clock midnight, it may be that he's not alone. It may be that he is being sent out as the vanguard of a PR campaign concerning this. It may be that at the highest levels, they've said to one another, all right, boys, we're going to have to start doing something about this. Nobody except the United States of America and NATO and Israel want this war, but it appears as if we're being forced into a corner. Therefore, let's do the following. Joe, Fred, and Arthur, you guys give some interviews and make some bold statements advertising the fact that we're being forced to move in a direction. George, Edward, and Ken, you guys make contacts with your connections overseas and do whatever it may be. Jerry, Jeremy, and John, as the heads of the military, start sending Ilyushin 76 cargo planes to Iran. I don't know. I may be speculating too deeply, Marius, but I think it's worth mentioning that people who don't say things for nothing, people who don't make utterances that are meaningless, people with the greatest connection to the deepest corridors of power, and people with the most unbelievable influence are beginning to talk like that. In which case, it may be early days yet, but we may be edging towards the point where Russia comes out and says, right, we are now steadfastly with Iran. We've got a deal, one more strike, and you may consider yourselves at war with us, especially in light of the fact that although in the past Iran has refused to go into an arms treaty with Russia or a mutual defense pact with Russia, the Iranian foreign minister is, as we speak, meeting with the president of Russia, Marius. So it may all be beginning right now.
Yeah, Simon. And then just to end it off, I wanted to say that as well. But you've said it is that Putin is meeting with the foreign affairs minister of Iran. But I've also heard while he's meeting with them, he's going to meet some of the other leaders of the other countries surrounding Iran as well. But we'll keep an eye on it to see what is going to happen with that. Is Russia going to throw their support in with Iran, and is Iran going to accept it, that help that Russia might want to give him? But that we'll talk about maybe in a later video. Once again, thanks, Simon, for taking some of your time to chat with us about the world happenings, and everything is happening thick and fast. I mean, we'll most probably do a couple of videos, like I said, quite a few videos through this week. So yeah, this was part 2, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Simon. I hope you have a great day.
Donkey Marius. Thanks everybody for listening. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.